Thanks for coming today, everyone. I'm really excited to be talking about desktop and the future of our desktop plans. I'm assuming everyone saw Kevin's section of the keynote this morning. You can think of this as the extended remix version of that with a lot more detail. So basically, as a little background, I started my career somewhere 10,000 years ago working on WinForms as a PM on the team for about 6 years before I worked on Silverlight. I've been doing client platform development, typically on the UI side, but kind of across the gamut of the app platform for about 20 years now. So I really like desktop. It's my wheelhouse, and I'm really excited to be talking about it. So before we start talking about some specific features and the things that we're doing, I want to talk a little bit about the reorg that happened a couple weeks ago in Microsoft with Windows. Basically, if you're one of the 5 people that didn't read all the tech news, the kind of Windows core team moved under Scott, Guthrie, and Jason. And as on the platform team, we are so excited about this. From a developer perspective, we've been working with Scott and Jason on the platform team a lot in the past. A lot of us are from Silverlight or from various parts of DevDiv in the past, and we know how much Scott and Jason love developers, love making customers successful, and work night and day, like for Scott, literally night and day, doing whatever he can to make customers successful and listen to customers and their requirements. And we're really excited to be able to bring more of that to the Windows desktop and our platform.
Just to define a term, DevDiv is actually developer division.
Sorry.
That's the org inside of Microsoft that builds Visual Studio, .NET, Azure SDKs, and stuff like that.
Yes.
So.
That's good that we were working with that Scott ran before he ran Azure. So before the cloud, pre-cloud. So proof points of this, why we're really excited, that 2 of the big announcements from this morning, both WinUI and MSIX running on Win 7, are things that would not have been possible before this reorg. So we're expecting to do a lot more things in the open on GitHub and to really help you ease your transition between Windows 7 and Windows 10. So again, from the platform side, we're really excited because this is going to be good things for Windows as a desktop and for Windows developers. So as Kevin and Joe talked a lot about in the keynote this morning, we're really re-engaging with desktop. In the last 3 to 4 years, we've been building a modern platform for modern applications, and we'll talk about what that specifically means. But in the last 8 to 10 months, we've been really kind of refocusing on the wheelhouse of the large volume of desktop developers and desktop apps that run on Windows. We really want to make it the most powerful place for your apps to get the job done that you need to do and your employees need to do. And of course, we're making sure that it's easy to do that with your existing investments in Windows Forms and WPF and the existing apps that you have. So today, Scott and I are going to cover basically a bunch of the things that we're doing, both in the release that will happen in 2018 later this year, as well as some of the things that are coming in 2019. So you're probably asking, desktop, it's been around forever, it's not that interesting. Well, there's a lot of activity and a lot of people writing desktop applications. I'm sure most people in this room, either personally or on their teams, are writing WinForms or WPF apps or have done that in the past. And that is still a very active community. I mean, this is just pulled from the Visual Studio telemetry. And in fact, that has grown quite a bit in the last couple years. We still see lots of activity, opening projects, creating new projects, and just, again, tracking this through Visual Studio telemetry. So this is a very active user base, and it's still a very vibrant community. From the perspective of what you can target with Windows 10, as I think Satya or Joe shared in one of the keynotes, there's 700 million Windows 10 desktops out there. And when we've talked to enterprise customers, they've either started their Windows 10 rollouts or they have plans to start their Windows 10 rollouts in the next year. So the industry, the ecosystem is moving forward to Windows 10. But again, we'll talk about some things today that will help you ease your transition from Windows 7. So as I mentioned earlier, we spent the last few years really focused on building a modern application platform for Windows. Platform designed to run on many different device form factors with small or large screens, different types of inputs and outputs, different amounts of processing power and battery life. However, there's still a lot of scenarios that are absolutely the best with a mouse, a keyboard, and 1 or 2 large monitors in front of you. So the challenge that we have as a platform team is to bring both of those 2 halves together into a kind of singular platform that brings everything together in the best of both worlds, both scenarios. So let's talk about what we mean when we talk about a modern application and what that means. So a modern application, they're designed from the ground up to respect the user's privacy, keep them secure, manage battery life, keep the device safe. Install and update is something that, as a modern developer, you don't think about. The tooling takes care of it, and updates are handled automatically for you. From a distribution perspective, it's always from a trusted source. Typically, it's from a store, a public store. Sometimes it's from a private store, but it's never from the web. From a modern UI perspective, there's many different input mechanisms: touch, gaze, ink, and then you're also moving forward to some emerging outputs like VR, speech. Of course, every single application that is new that we deal with these days has its source of truth in the cloud. Everything basically starts there, it lives there, and that's where all changes happen first and are propagated out. And insights so that you can make decisions and reason over how your application is performing in the wild. And finally, modern applications are often designed with reuse in mind, to be able to share potentially across different platforms of the web, at least to share with your front end and your back end as well. So really, it's not just about running on a single device or a single OS. It's really about running, using your code and assets in as many places as possible. So when I was showing this deck recently, they commented that this looked like a kid's birthday cake exploded on the screen. And I pointed out to him that I just used the theme colors from the slide deck that they gave us. So this is apparently Build 2018 is the year of funfetti. So it happened. So let's switch gears and talk about what those same attributes are from a desktop perspective, because they're quite different. So from a security perspective, desktop applications typically run at user or admin level security and need that level of permission, often to do things like read from every part of the file system that the user can access, set a registry key, or perhaps format a hard drive if it's a disk management utility. Like desktop apps do a lot of things. From a deployment perspective, you've got MSIs, you've got custom installers. Often ISVs or enterprises will roll their own updaters, and that's again often a lot of source of headaches. From a distribution perspective, the most common thing we're all familiar with on the web is getting an MSI from a website. It's what I like to call MSI roulette. We've all done this. There's a utility. You're like, oh man, I really need to reorder a bunch of JPEGs or something on my machine. This app says it'll do it. Do I really want to give it permission? OK. And hope that you don't get some sort of spyware. I mean, it's really, we've all done that and experienced that. And most of the time it's OK, but a lot of times you end up having to reformat a machine because it got corrupted with something. And of course, from an enterprise perspective, there's a lot of, again, distribution systems that we use, like SCCM, and a lot of enterprises use, but there's also some custom options too. So you have a lot of flexibility there. From a UI perspective, pretty much the bulk of the things that you run on Windows are either HWin-based in MFC or WinForms or VB, or using WPF. And so those are kind of the primary ways that UI happens on the desktop. And those things are really designed with a mouse and a keyboard and very dense UI in mind. Getting the most productivity out of a desktop setup with a couple monitors and a mouse and keyboard, and just really sitting down and getting work done for a couple hours at a time. So this is becoming less and less true for desktop applications as the kind of lift and shift momentum to move backends to the cloud is happening, but still the traditional desktop model is kind of local data living on the machine. And of course, most applications for Windows are designed for the Windows desktop only, or if you're designing a Mac app, it's designed for the Mac only. And so again, these are what we think about as desktop attributes. So if you think about that list, both of those lists had some really interesting things and some really not interesting things, depending on your scenario and what you're trying to accomplish. And so our challenge as the platform team is to take the best of both of those worlds and combine them into one platform, so that depending on your scenario, you can take advantage of either sets of attributes. So sometimes you want your app to have tightly locked down security, and sometimes you're writing a disk management utility. Sometimes you want your app to run intermittently in the background when some new data comes in, and sometimes you're compiling a giant project and you want it to basically keep compiling in the background when you're doing something else. And so based on the scenario, you need to have those choices of flexibility, because that's really what desktop is about. It's about the flexibility and the power to do what you need to do. So what are we doing? We're basically doing two things. The first is to take desktop application scenarios, the things that you want to do and your users expect to do with a desktop app, and push those into the modern platform to make the platform fully capable to do anything you would expect to do on the desktop side. We're also taking features from the modern platform and breaking them up into kind of an a la carte model. So you can, instead of having to write a new app or adopt an entire new platform, you can just pluck off one of the features and use that in your existing desktop application without many changes. And so we really want to make these two things go. And as both of these happen, as this ecosystem kind of becomes a flywheel, you get kind of this positive feedback loop where as it becomes, as we do more and more things to use features in existing applications, it's easier to modernize your application. And as those new modern features become more compelling and address more desktop scenarios, it's more compelling to start to use them. So really, this starts to spin on each other, and this is the motion we're trying to basically accomplish in the next few releases of Windows. So speaking of the Windows releases, we'll talk about this in an interesting way. So we've tried many times to get the Windows consumer PR team to give us names that we can use when we talk about these updates. They really don't like to name them. They've also had not a ton of success with the names they've chosen. There was the Creators Update, then like Fall Creators Update, but wait, that only works in North America. Autumn Creators Update, and then now they're like, April, can we say April? Like they're really cagey. And so we'll just talk about how we're doing it. So we're shipping Windows twice a year now, every 6 months, plus or minus. We just had the release in April. We'll have another release at the end of this year, in the fall/early winter, that will be in 2018. And so I'll talk about that as the late 2018 release. That release is pretty much, it's been planned for a while, mostly coding. There's a few more weeks of feature coding. That one's pretty much in the runway. And a lot of the features we'll talk about are things that are coming out then. And then we'll talk about things that are post that. And so I'll talk about a future update or some things in 2019. And so things in 2019, that's the opportunity for people in this room and people watching online to give us feedback and help prioritize our backlog. So when I talk about features and lists of things in the future, if you're like, that's awesome, don't do that, please let us know, because now is the time to give us that feedback for 2019. OK, so we'll talk about the session in basically 3 chunks. And this really is kind of, it's one click down from the keynote as far as a lot more detail there, but there's still a lot more detail to be had at Build. And so every time there's a session or a topic that has deeper detail that you're going to be interested in as a desktop developer, I'll show you a slide about that and give you a little more information pointed there. But we're going to dig in through these 3 areas of UI, containers, and the Microsoft Graph. So without further ado, let's dig into UI. So again, we'll break this into 2 sections like we talked about. We'll talk about things that we're doing to make the modern platform encompass more desktop scenarios. And we'll talk about things that we're doing to make it easier to use the modern platform for existing applications. Really kind of both directions of the flywheel. So the first thing we'll talk about is the elephant in the room, or I like to say the elephant-sized white space in the room, which is the density of the current UWP XAML UI stack. It's very Duplo is the graphic we have on the screen. I think is a lot of people have kind of felt it feels toy-like, and we've heard this from a lot of people internally, from external customers. It really is you don't have as much information on the screen as you like. It's not as easy to customize that and theme it, and that really makes applications feel really not professional. So the other thing that's changed since this design system was really introduced many years ago now is that customers and users have gotten better at things on screens. Like touchscreens are everywhere, we're used to them, and you don't need as much white space. And we found that in usability studies. So just generally speaking, we're kind of responding to both customer feedback and how users act. And so what we're doing is 2 things. We're introducing a new Microsoft standard that will replace the existing standard, so no more Duplo. And we're also introducing a new compact that is really designed to kind of mimic WPF's amount of information density that you can opt into when you really need to tune your applications for mouse and keyboard. So here is an example of all 3 of those models and a set of controls for each one. And you'll notice you're basically getting about 15% more stuff in a given amount of space as you kind of go right. So let's look at a few UI mock-ups of the current apps with the current standard and then moving to the new standard. So what we've got here is, I'm sure everyone's familiar with this, the Mail app. And this is with the current sizing. And this is what it would look like with the new standard mode. And so basically, we'll be updating our controls in the UWP UI stack, as well as all that Microsoft apps that use them, like Mail, as well as other parts of the Windows shell that use XAML. And so this will be kind of rolled out over the next year to 18 months. The controls in UWP UI will be able to use this in the next release in 2018. And again, your existing app won't change because we don't want to break it. But if you can recompile and target this with Visual Studio and start getting the new mode. And so just to show you again, here's bigger. Here's what it'll look like with the new standard. So again, not a big change, but just feels a little bit tighter, a little more professional. You get a little more information on the screen. So again, we'll show settings. This is with the current UI size, and then tightened up. Again, you just get a little bit more information on the screen. If this was any of our machines, you'd probably, once you had this level of information density, you'd probably shrink it down a little bit, so you'd remove even more white space as you resized it, and it just felt kind of what you'd expect. So then we'll talk about compact size. So this is a mode that you can opt into as a developer if you really care about mouse and keyboard and really getting the most UI on the screen at a time. And again, this is just one property set. So it used to be, we've had feedback from customers in the past that some people have claimed it's impossible. I would say it's nearly impossible to do this with just setting some of the properties on the current XAML templates. But now we're making it so you can just do one resource change. So this mockup that the Windows design team and the C&E, the kind of Azure design team, has worked together on to basically show what a UI might look like with compact mode. And so this is an example of the basically a fluentified server explorer. And when you look at this, you don't think that's a toy, you don't think Duplo, you think I'm going to get my job done, right? I mean, that's feels like professional UI. So for more information on the Fluent design system itself and things that are basically getting an overview of it, things that we're doing as far as inside of Microsoft, as well as Office starting to adopt Fluent, and the various controls we're updating, go see Chigusa and Tim's session later today. And then Paul is going to go a click deeper when it comes to talking about the controls and the framework and integrating Fluent there. So he'll talk about how you get depth, and motion, colors and branding, and the new compact mode. So that'll all be in Paul's talk, which is later today. So he's pretty much back to back with Chigusa and Tim. So you can get all the Fluent and the UI that you need in one big session. So then we'll talk about controls and framework investments. So this is kind of on top of the UI language. What are the actual widgets themselves you can interact with? So the big news from this morning was around WinUI. And so this lets us give you access to the controls as soon as they're released. So if you have a version of Windows 10 down to the anniversary update, which we called RS1, which was like 2 years ago now, that you can basically start using these controls on that. And so the goal here is that you can start using controls as soon as we release them and don't have to wait for all of your customers to update their machines, really trying to streamline the process for developers to use controls on existing applications without having to wait for their customers to update, because a lot of times you can't control the machines that your customers have, as I'm sure you guys all know. So the next thing we're doing is basically a set of line of business controls that people just expect to have in a UI framework. And this list is really driven by feedback that we've gotten from customers, the kind of top set of things we need to address. And again, that's I'm sure a lot of people in this room have contributed to that feedback. So you've got a data grid and a table, the concept of a data form with validation in the UI. You've got a menu control, an editable combo box, a lot of just the kind of bread and butter basics. We're also increasing the performance of Xbind. We know that's been a feature that a lot of people are using. We're also introducing a library of UI commands with kind of built-in glyphs and localized command names, so you can just kind of use those really quickly and get an MVVM UI for the most common things you'd expect, like file and save. So in future updates, again, kind of post-2018, we're looking at the idea of a tab control that has like tearaway tabs like you would expect in a browser, a Fluent status bar, kind of an obvious one. There's some improvements for data grid that we're investigating, specifically virtualization and letting you bind to a column. The auto suggest box is a control we've gotten some tough feedback on, and so we're gonna kind of go back to the drawing board on that a little bit to make the search experience a little better. One of the things that we've been kind of prototyping a little bit and doing some design around is the idea of being able to interop a little better with HTML content and XAML content in an app if you have them both. And so the idea would be that you could data bind between a .NET model that you could use basically XAML UI and HTML UI data binding to the same model. And so we're doing some prototyping there. when we have some stuff to share there, we'll kick it out in an insider build, and we can get feedback on that. We're also working with Office as Chigusa will talk about in her session, around the design of the kind of productivity with Fluent in the future. And so we're working with them on the kind of evolution of what the ribbon experience is, and that will result in a new ribbon control that you'll be able to use in all your applications coming sometime next year. So another cool feature that Kevin showed, and I'm going to show again, is this inline ink handwriting. This is actually a feature that shipped in the April update, but it's not on by default, and we're turning it on by default in text box and rich text box with the update later this year. So this is something that if you have a pen, you can just start inking and get autocomplete or autocorrect and suggestions in a text box automatically. It's a pretty handy thing. I'll show you a demo of that in a second. Actually, right now. So our IT policies are so aggressive that I've already had to log into this meeting 5 times since I've been up here. Let's see, that is 7. All right, does this mouse even work? No. All right, so what we've got here is, this is just a UWP application. I just went in and created a new project. And what we've got is just 2 controls in this app. So you've got a text box, and you've got a rich text box. So on this text box, it's just drag and drop out the standard one, and I set this one property, which is handwriting view enabled. So this is how you turn on that handwriting thing, auto-correct, or auto-inking in a text box. And as I mentioned, currently you have to set this property as of the release we'll have later this year. That will be on by default on all modern text boxes. And then in the rich edit control, I'm doing this thing called content link providers, which is not a super intuitive name, but basically this lets you do @support, which I'll show you what that means in just a second, inside your text boxes. So first things first, I will undo my handy pen, tap in here, and I can start typing or writing. I have atrocious handwriting, but it does OK. And then if you go to the text box, you can say, let's meet at, and it basically starts bringing up @support. And so this is what those content link providers give you. And if you pick something, it then turns into an object, which is an object, and you get, for those 2 particular providers, you get UI and an operating system for free. So you can start to do some really rich things that you might expect in a modern desktop application, basically with no code whatsoever, and starting to integrate those into your applications. Back to the deck. So for more information on the controls on WinUI and this new sample app that we have for line of business apps called the Van Arsdale app, go check out Daniel and Ryan's session, which is tomorrow. Ryan's in the back there. And by back, I meant middle. Harnessing the power of ink. So Avani and Yubo will be talking again tomorrow morning on you'll get more information on the ink platform. So Kevin mentioned this morning that we have this new Ink AI service, and it's really neat because it runs code both locally for doing the translation that you saw, that I just demoed, happens locally, but there's also a way that you can, it's starting to interact with the cloud to basically give us telemetry and make that handwriting better over time and for the community. And there's ways that you can interact with that as developers as well. So there'll be a bunch of information on that. There's general information on the Ink platform because there's a bunch of things that you can do with Ink, specifically in your UWP applications that are a little more advanced than just showing those simple controls. And then they'll talk about ecosystem momentum. So there's a bunch of apps in the Windows Store already, and talk about some of the new hardware innovations they're doing in the Windows Pen ecosystem, which is becoming surprisingly large. There's a lot of people starting to make Windows Pens. So now we'll jump in and talk about windowing. This is definitely a kind of microcosm of the whole, taking a modern attributes and desktop attributes and trying to graph them together. Because basically the modern platform has its roots in these kind of full screen phone scenarios. That's where a lot of these scenarios evolve from. But if you think about a desktop set of scenarios, they're much more advanced from a multitasking perspective, and the things that you're used to is much, much deeper. Think about, you've got dockable and floating tool windows, you've got custom title bars, sometimes you have no title bars, you've got MDI, you've got transparency. A lot of things you just expect as a user or developer to be able to access in your toolkit are things that aren't in the modern platform right now. So I'm really excited to talk about some of the advancements we're making in windowing in 2018 and some of the investments we're making after that. Because this is one of the biggest things that we've, kind of a big miss from the modern platform is really to be able to control Windows on Windows. So the first thing we're going to have is basically two new kinds of windows that you can have on your application that all talk to the same thread. So in the recent past, you could create a new window, but it would have to be on a different thread. These are all new kinds of windows you can create on the same UI. You've got a tool window, and you have a light dismiss window, which light dismiss is like you bring it up, when it loses focus, it goes away. So you don't have to hit a cancel button. It just loses focus and disappears. So when these things are on the same UI thread, they're effectively grouped together. So you'll only get one alt tab entry. When you minimize them, they'll all minimize together. They'll behave kind of like a single application together. You'll be able to constrain the sizing on apps and windows by, if you give them a minimum or maximum size, the window manager will take care of that for you. And of course, you can set size and position and read size and position. So you can now position windows on Windows, and you can put them on multi-monitors. You can get monitor changes in your application. So if topology changes, you can, when someone docks and undocks, you can go move your windows around, and you can remember where they were and restore them later. So you can really make it a much better experience. So in future updates, obviously, we're going to listen to feedback. That's the first thing that will happen. But we're definitely going to make it possible to have multiple top-level windows on the same UI thread, not just the tool windows and the light dismiss windows. We're going to start giving control over things like the control boxes, the window styles, and kind of decoupling them from just this tool window and light dismiss window options. We'll look at things like topmost windows, synchronous modal windows. I know that's been a bit of feedback that we've gotten from a lot of customers who are used to the kind of OK cancel workflows that you can do in a traditional WinForms or WPF app. If that's not blocking your UI thread, it kind of is a real pain to program against it. And there's some much more advanced things. So with the advent of a modern platform and things like HoloLens, you have to think about what windowing means in a 3D space. And so we're trying to keep these concepts really, really simple if you're on a desktop, but we also need to make them powerful enough so that you can use them and position these windows in space and think about what that means. So this is a vein of investment that we started, but will go on for a while because there's a lot of work to do here. So again, to learn more about Windows on Windows, go see Robert's talk tomorrow. He's got a ton of content here. He'll talk about the general evolution of how things have kind of gotten to where we are today. He'll talk about all the concepts that we're introducing to kind of describe modern Windows and modern windowing. And then he'll show you the APIs and give you a bunch of demos to see the scenarios in action. All right, so now we'll talk about XAML islands. This is the announcement that Kevin made today that basically lets you, this is the feature that lets you use UWP UI as an HWind in any place that you can host an HWind. So the first thing we'll do is talk about the motivation behind the feature. So as customers started using Desktop App Converter, the Centennial project, if you will, to add modern packaging and start to call some modern APIs from their apps, they said, you told me I could call all the WinRT APIs, and literally half of the WinRT APIs are UI. Like, where's the other half of my UI, or my APIs, please? At the same time, in talking to Office, they are starting to target more and more platforms with their end applications. And on Windows, they have UWP apps for many of their experiences, and they have Win32 apps for many of their experiences, and they only want to write new UI once. And so they were basically saying, how can I write native UI, because Office is all completely written in native code, one time and use it in a UWP app and a Win32 app? And so with both of those things in mind, we said, I wonder what we can do. So we came up with this idea of XAML islands. So from an I guess I went backwards. Sorry about that. So from an architecture perspective, we'll kind of build up how this works, and we'll talk about it here. So the first thing you start with is a UWP XAML control. So this could be a control that's in the box that we ship. This could be a third-party control, or this could be custom user control like Kevin showed. We have the new API that's called, it's a new WinRT API that exposes an HWind, the XAML bridge source. And once you have an HWind, pretty much any place that can host an HWind, you can use it. So we are building two specific things to make it easier to use for WinForms and WPF. We're building a host control that inherits from system.windows.forms.control, and a control that inherits from the WPF control base. And those are going to be open source projects that are in GitHub and the community toolkit. Think about that like the element host in WinForms for WPF. It's a very similar concept. On top of this, we want to make it super easy to use the most common controls, the things that we've had the most requests for. And so we're also going to build those as custom controls for WinForms and WPF on top of those kind of base control wrappers. And so let's talk a little more about that. Actually, so the other thing to know is, as Kevin mentioned, this all runs in the same process as your application currently. So there's basically, it runs the same process in the same thread, sorry. So there's none of the issues that you've seen in the past with some of the models where you've had to spin up effectively a different app because it's in a different process and start to communicate between them. This is really just running a thread. And so if you're a native application like Office, it won't bring in a new version or it won't bring in an instance of .NET. It just runs natively. But if you're an existing .NET app and you start using this, it basically with WinRT to the existing instance of .NET in the application. So it really is just like .NET types. I mean, I'll show you a demo in a second. Like you are programming these two UI languages like they're both at home in the same place. It really feels very, very seamless to use it. And so again, as I mentioned, these controls are going to be the easy button specifically for 2018. This API is in the release that we're going to be shipping later this year, but it's definitely in preview mode, and I'll talk about some of those limitations in a second. Kevin talked about how everything just works, and in the fullness of time, everything will just work, but because he's a VP and he has to say things succinctly on stage, he was a little economic with the truth. And so we'll talk about what you should do in 2018, and we'll talk about what you should do after 2018 and how you can use those things. So let's talk about the easy button. So these control wrappers are basically WPF and WinForms tune wrappers. So we're trying to really honor the way that you would want to use these controls inside of WinForms and WPF, making sure you have toolbox support, good property grid support, the right defaults in the properties, a good drag and drop experience in WinForms, all the things you would expect to have in that local experience. We're working with the VS team to make sure that these things, because they're delivered as a NuGet package, when you reference them, they automatically show up in the toolbox because, as you guys know, if you've ever tried to have a NuGet package that has controls in it, they don't show up in the toolbox. And we're also, based on feedback, when we talked about this feature with MVPs in March, we get some feedback that we need to really think about Win7. And so we've been starting to design what that means for these controls, and we think that we can, for some controls at least, like a web view control, we can give you some fallback for properties. So you could set a source property and a navigator property, a handful of them, and have that behave reasonably on Windows 7 and Windows 10. Windows 7 using the IE11 base control, and on Windows 10 you use the edge control, but basically have one binary so you don't have to think about building twice and deploying twice. And at the very least, we'll make sure that the controls don't crash on Windows 7 because if anyone has ever tried to do .NET version checking, the jitter makes it pretty tough because it likes to look for things, and if it doesn't find the things, it'll crash when trying to even find a type. Try and abstract that for you so you can just use the control and not have to think about the Win7 versus Win10ness of it, unless you're using some very specific Windows 10 functionality that is not present. And again, these are all on GitHub. So right now we've got based on the RS4, not XAML Islands API, the web view control that we talked about a few months ago in Developer Day, that's in sorry, I said RS4, the April release that shipped a couple weeks ago. So that lets you use the Edge web view inside of an application on existing Windows that we ship today. And we have a control wrapper for that, and that's in GitHub. And we will basically add more controls to that as we work on the release later this year that will be based on XAML Islands. So that'll have a media player, an ink canvas, an ink toolbar, maps, swap chain panel, and other things based on feedback we get from this stream. These are the ones that we've heard most commonly requested from customers. And again, this is all on GitHub. The web view launched as part of the Windows Community Toolkit update yesterday, so it should be there today. All right, so let's go do a demo. And once again, I will log in. IT. 6. All right, because I'm WinForms, I'm going to show you WinForms. So what we've got here is a standard WinForms project, just to basically create a new project form. And I've got this project that I added a reference to the XAML content host. So this is that first content hosting layer. This is a prototype of that NuGet package that we're working on that basically lets you host XAML islands inside of a WinForms app and a Windows Forms control. So you can just drag and drop it from the toolbox. And so once you've got these things, they're just, they look like standard kind of your element host behavior that you would expect from WPF. And then you can basically start coding against them. So let's make this full screen so it's easier to see. So on the load event, I basically just fire up a ink canvas control. So I'm just creating a UWP control on this .NET framework thread. Set a couple of properties on it to make sure that it fits the size of its content host. This is a thing that I've given some feedback on the control they're working on. You shouldn't have to think about setting height and width. It should automatically do that for you. And it should automatically resize for you as well. And then if you want this ink canvas to deal with touch and not just a pen, because this machine does not have a pen, I set it to take touch. And then you just basically put it inside your content host. Similarly, the ink toolbar, you create a new UWP ink toolbar, and you set its target canvas. So you basically, I'm connecting these two things together through the XAML islands. Again, this works because it's all running in the same .NET thread. So these are two different islands, and the controls are talking to each other because they're paired when ink canvas and ink toolbar pair together through the same .NET thread. And then you just set the toolbar. So to the content. So we get out of full screen. We go run the app. And you get to see that I am absolutely Picasso. So we'll do some drawing. We'll do some highlighting. We'll use this fancy ruler thing to get a pencil in there. See, check me out, huh? Look at that. So yeah, you can take a picture and sell that later for sure. But again, this just shows how easy it is to start integrating this content into your existing WinForms and WPF applications. So again, this project here will be something that we're releasing on GitHub as a standalone. Well, it'll be a NuGet package you can just use, or it'll be on GitHub if you want to get the source in your project. But for right now, this is just a prototype. So this will be in that community toolkit in a few months. All right, back to slides. All right, so has anyone ever seen the Saturday Night Live fake commercial for Happy Fun Ball, where it's like 5 seconds of Happy Fun Ball is great for kids, and then it's like, do not touch Happy Fun Ball. Happy Fun Ball has been known to cause cancer in small children. I joke with people that's kind of what this slide is, because we're going to talk about all the things that are not working today, the things that we will get working next year, but I want to make sure you have a full caveat and understanding of what you're getting. Again, maybe like any modern drug commercial, where it's just people running through a field and then pages of text of things that terrible things that happen to you. OK, so first thing to note, like kind of an architectural limitation, because this is all exposed via HWinds, as we've talked about, there are kind of your standard HWind airspace issues. So if you're putting this in a WPF app and you put a rotate transform on it, it's not going to rotate. Like, it's still an HWind, it's still a square, or a rectangle, sorry. God, you're killing me. So basically the idea is that HWind is a rectangle, and if you try and do something with it that is not outside of that rectangle, it's probably not going to get clipped by whatever is outside and around it. So like I said, if you try to take this square inside of a WPF app and rotate it, the view in WPF will rotate, but the square won't. So things like that. And so probably a more common way to think about it is if you have transparency, and some overlays might get some issues there. However, like if you think about things like context menus, those have their own HWind, so those bring up a new rectangle, and those will kind of overlay inside of the hosting region. So it's really, if you think about transparency or rotation, those are going to be your two big limitations. Happy, Mr. Hunter? Got to keep the co-presenter happy. OK, so here's the Happy Fun Ball part. So in the release later this year, so the model for using this, the thing that Kevin showed you this morning for using a custom user control, the tooling model today is pretty rough. You basically have to you have to compile the code twice. You need basically all the output from the UWP XAML compiler, and you need to get all that code, as well as the code for your control, into your WinForms or WPF project. So you basically need to set up a project-to-project reference where you're copying output to your WinForms and WPF project, and then you basically have to add it to your project as something that's compiled there. So that is a little bit rocky. It's certainly not an experience we're proud of, and we're working with the VS tooling team to get an update on that next year. But definitely, it's again, stick with the easy button unless you need some of these more advanced controls. So because of that model, if you don't have source for a control, it's going to be very difficult. If you have multiple top-level windows on the same thread, so you saw I had you can have effectively infinite islands on the same top-level window on the same thread, and if you have not top-level windows, you can have as many islands as you want as well. It's when you have multiple top-level windows, which in WinForms is like, you're in Form 1, click a button, Form 2 equals new f.show. That's creating a new top-level window. So in that case, you either have to spin that off on a different thread, which in some cases is OK if it's like a details form. But in some cases, if you need to talk back, you'll have to kind of manage your island usage there. And again, these are just limitations for this year. Next year, we're working to address these. From a resource loading perspective, the model to use in 2018 is really file-based resources. So if you need to think about localization, mixing, you're probably asking, how am I going to mix resx files with MRT files? We're thinking about that, and we're designing a good tooling experience for it. But for the time being, you're best off just thinking about targeting a single language and using file-based resources. And unfortunately, one of the things that Kevin showed in the keynote, the inline inking, was very fake. So that there was some keynote wizardry there. That is not working in the current builds. And then two more that actually someone mentioned before the session even. They must have been playing with this. If you go get late second half 2018, whatever they call it, insider build, the insider builds today that we released, accessibility is not working. And so you basically won't be getting the iAccessible objects pushed back to your host. And if you try to have something that uses reveal, which is one of the new Fluent UI cool features, it actually just draws as white. So instead of getting a cool kind of opacity that's drawn by the GPU, you get a white square. So those are just very, very temporary limitations, but just kind of showing you guys the full dirty laundry. All right, so now we're going to switch gears. Done with UI. We're going to jump and talk about containerization. The two big areas of containerization are .NET Core 3.0 and MSIX. So Kevin talked a lot about these today. But we're going to talk about .NET Core first. And to talk about that, there's no one better to talk about it than Mr. Scott Hunter. So here he is.
Losing stuff.
Well-oiled machine.
OK. Wait for things to wake up. Yeah, so yesterday this thing does not want to stay on in the pocket. OK. Yesterday we announced .NET Core 3. And I thought I'd just go through the same stuff that we talked about yesterday in the .NET only session, assuming that some of you guys were not there. First thing is we shipped .NET Core. First off, .NET Core 1.0 came out about 2 years ago. And it was when we were trying to change where .NET could run. We changed .NET Core to be totally open source, cross-platform, primarily web and cloud. And so with this build, we're bringing desktop, IoT, and AI onto .NET Core as well. And this primarily means we are bringing WinForms and WPF Core. And so if you're a .NET developer, you might ask, why would you do this? And I'll kind of get into that. First off, all the stuff Mike showed about XAML Islands is available to both 4.8 applications or 4.7 applications and .NET Core applications. The controls he mentioned, some of them will be actually in the toolbox and easy to just drag and drop into your applications. High DPI fixes. One of the complaints we get about WinForms all the time is we want more high DPI fixes. The challenge we have, and I'm looking at the people in the front row here, Peter, is if I change WinForms to actually be high DPI aware, it's going to move pixels around. Your app's going to break. And so it's something we haven't been able to do in the .NET framework that's globally installed on the machine. And .NET Core is going to enable us to do that because we can actually not break existing apps. We want to make sure that .NET Core 3 apps all have full access to WinRT, so you get access to all the APIs that are in Windows. One of the exciting things that we have, and I'll demo in a second, is we have a .NET Core app bundler. And this is going to let you take a WinForm or WPF application, compile it So it's precompiled. You'll be able to link out all the parts of .NET Core or .NET Framework, .NET Core, Windows Forms, WPF that you're not using to make a super small exe, and then we'll actually just make an exe for you. And so we're going to give you the option of having a WinForm WPF app that uses a globally installed .NET Core, or you can actually compile it directly into your app and give that app away. And so the big thing here is it's going to address all the side-by-side stuff. The big reasons on a lot of people ask me, why not just make all these enhancements to WinForms and WPF in .NET Framework? Well, there's only one .NET Framework on the machine, and every time we change it, we break somebody's apps. And so we're really going to try to get to a mode where we don't do that. .NET Core is our platform where you, as a developer, can choose what version of .NET Core you want, and you can decide when you want to upgrade. The operating system doesn't do it for you. And so you get this full side-by-side. You're going to get a bunch of cool improvements in the runtime. So the .NET Core runtime was open sourced about 3 years ago. And we have taken a lot of fixes in the .NET Core runtime that we can't take in .NET Framework because they would break compatibility. One of the big areas that we're going to show in the demo in a second is we have this API that enumerates files in your file system. Today, if it actually finds a folder it doesn't have access to, it faults or throws an exception. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because how would you know to enumerate all your files and skip the ones you don't have access to unless the thing throws an exception? I can't give an exclusion list. So the one in .NET Core doesn't do that. But I can't change the one in .NET Framework because that would break existing apps. And so you're going to get a bunch of performance improvements and a bunch of API improvements because of the side-by-side nature of .NET Core. And we have a new project model in .NET Core that is a simplified CS proj that a lot of folks have been really enjoying. And this means we're going to bring that system to WinForm and WPF as well. So if you want to switch to the demo machine, Mike.
All right.
OK. So I've got a Visual Studio project here. And I've got two apps, or a single app, called PySample. And all PySample is a simple app that you give it a file path, it enumerates all the files, it draws a pie chart. And so let's try this. I'm going to run the .NET Framework one first. Not a crazy app, but let's just put in cback source. And we'll run it. And so you see it happens in about 576 milliseconds here. Turn the zoomer on
Scott,
here.
you didn't use all the theme colors. It's not nearly as bright.
Sorry, man. 576 milliseconds. Now I'm going to go over here and select the .NET Core version of this. We'll run the same thing, cback source. Run this, and you're going to see 209 milliseconds. So let me just bring these both up side by side here. My machine's not cooperating.
Don't you love the new smaller resize handles?
There you go. So you can see 576 milliseconds compared to 209. The .NET Core version's faster. So you're going to see by moving a WinForm or WPF application to .NET Core, it's going to be faster. To prove the demo is not fake, I've got this button here that I can open. And what it will show me is it will show me the DLL is actually running by this application. And you're going to see there's a ton of .NET Core app 2.1 RC DLLs loaded here. It's actually running on .NET Core. The next cool feature in this world is I can take these same apps, and I can right-click on the PySample. I can click Publish. And this, if you look down here, you're going to see a bunch of crazy stuff going on. Trimmed 122 out of 226 files out, saving 18 megs. Final file size is 64 megs. We've not even worked really on the linker yet. But what it's doing right now is it's linking out at assembly level, so it just removed all the assemblies that are not required by the project. We can go a lot deeper than this. We can actually go into the actual IL inside of each assembly. So I think you're going to see the sizes of these go down dramatically over time. But still, a 60 meg app is .NET Core plus WinForms plus a Telerik control. If I actually look in this to also show it's a core app, we talked about the project model. I can come over here and edit the CS Proj, and you can see that I'm basically bringing in a package to do the trimming. I'm bringing in System Web Forms as a NuGet package, and I'm bringing in a folder that has some Telerik controls. So I wanted to show that I can take some existing Telerik controls that we've never talked to Telerik about and just use them on this thing. So it should be very compatible to your existing applications. And that'll be one of the big things once we have a preview of this, is to go find what the compatibility level is. If we want, I actually have to really prove the point here, how portable this stuff is. Let me bring up, can you find us a demo monkey, Mike?
Right. Oh, we have a volunteer? All right.
So what we're going to do is, I've got this same WinForm app running on I copied to a memory stick here, and we're going to stick it in this machine.
It's on the other side.
Other side.
What version of Windows is on this machine again?
I think it's Fall Creators, actually.
Oh, okay. So that's.
We don't really care.
You say that now.
Sorry.
The tech doesn't care.
There we go.
What kind of adapter do you have here?
Is that not a mini display port?
No.
Do you need an HDMI?
We got VGA, if you want to go old school.
Yeah, VGA, or there should be a display.
Right here.
In there.
It's right there. It's next to the USB stick.
I tried earlier, and it was not cooperative.
Oh, so it's upside down, maybe?
There you
There you go.
Okay.
And this is 7. It takes a village to make a demo.
So I'll let you, it's your laptop, find the memory stick. Yeah. We did this demo with ASP.NET Core years ago, grabbing laptops out of the audience, whether they were Macs or PCs, and showing you could run the apps. But these are fully self-contained WinForm WPF apps that don't require anything installed on the machine, no registry, no nothing.
Does he have your data file?
He has to select a folder. Anywhere.
Oh, it just does. Does file system
you
snarfing?
just point at the folder, and it loops over the folder, and then gives you a pie chart of the relevant data. Click run. Wow, that's a full folder there. Yeah, program files is a good one.
Nice. Wait for it.
Now he's got some files. And a spinning disk.
Hopefully this machine has an SSD. There we go.
And you can actually click one of those to...
Yeah, that doesn't work.
If anybody saw my talk yesterday, I turned my trackpad off, and Hanselman hates me for it. So, anyways, that's just showing you the future direction of where we want to take the WinForm stuff and the WPF stuff, all the benefits of .NET Core, desktop, the best desktop applications, and give you the flexibility to patch them when you want, how you want, make them into single X's if you want. So the idea really here is to give you more control.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I've got one more of these demos that Mike really wanted me to show, so let's show it here real quick.
I think it's 7 total laptops on stage now. It's the right number.
A couple years ago, Hanselman and I had 9.
It's .NET Core guys.
This is an app that Scott Hanselman wrote for his kids like 8 years ago. And we ported it last week for fun. And this is a WPF application using the XAML Islands bridge that you talked about, where we went and took a ink control and stuck it in. So I'll show you the app. The app's just Scott Hanselman's kids, when they were young, they didn't know what they were doing. They would just beat on the keyboard and stuff like that. So he wrote an app that made beating on the keyboard entertaining. I'm a different kind of parent. I just removed the laptop from the child. But you can draw on the screen over here.
To make it sound too.
It makes sounds. And what we did is this is an old WPF app, but now this is a Windows 10 ink control running over here with it as well. We haven't done the magic, which is we really want to put one on top of the other. That's the next phase. But it just shows the flexibility of with the XAML Island being able to take all the new modern stuff that you've built in UWP, and now you can use that in any WinForm or WPF app that you want. It's a pretty powerful thing where basically we've taken all of the UI stacks and merged them together in some ways.
And you can stick it on a USB stick and pass it out to anyone.
Pass it out to anybody.
Very nice.
So that's what's coming. We're going to have a preview of this a little bit later this year. And I hope that we'll be RTM before we're here next year. Thank you, guys.
Cool. You want to talk about the roadmap?
That was the roadmap.
That was the roadmap. All right. Preview later this year, RTM next year. All right. Do you want to show your build here?
Yeah.
All right. Skipping.
Way went through these.
All right.
There you go.
Sorry.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Thanks, Scott. So now we'll talk about deployment and MSIX, which is really the future of deployment technology. So basically, MSIX is the evolution of MSI. It's designed to be a superset of all the different things that you see on the screen. We're really thinking about all the different scenarios that people use to deploy on desktop and package on desktop and really make sure that MSIX addresses those. So MSIX is designed to work for every app in a large app catalog and every PC in an organization. So in order to really work on every device in an organization, we need to have Win7 support. And so that's, Kevin made that announcement today. And as the slide shows, John Vinsel will give a demo of this. I actually believe that John's talk was yesterday. I'll show you the trailer slide for it in a second, but his talk was yesterday. So you should go check out that recording and learn more about this. Also, MSIX is an open source project on GitHub, and there's ports for iOS, Android, and macOS. We have some other internal teams of the company that are using MSIX as kind of an extension deployment technology. I can't talk about what teams those are, but they'll be ready to talk about it soon enough, and they're a big brand. So when it comes to packaging technology, if it's really going to be successful for your entire app catalog and your entire organization, it needs to have great tooling for both developers and great tooling for IT pros. From the developer side, we've got the packaging project, which we released last year, which basically lets you add MSIX packaging to any existing WinForms or WPF projects, or really any desktop projects inside of Visual Studio. We're also working with the VS team to add a more streamlined model next year that will basically let you use the same project to generate an MSIX. So you can just open up your WinForms or WPF app and say, build me an MSIX, much like you can target click once today. From an IT Pro perspective, as Kevin mentioned in the keynote this morning, we're introducing a new IT Pro focused tool. So you can think about this as the current desktop app converter command line tool really on steroids. So it will support a much greater degree of commands and flexibility as far as how you invoke it. It will have a UI, so it's easier to use from that perspective. It'll be more scriptable. And they're also building this new thing called, I think they're called compat frameworks. And really the idea is there's certain things that an existing application might do as far as reading to certain like folders or locations that are really not kind of a best practice, where it's common for if you read or write things from those locations, either a Windows update or another application will stomp on it and cause compatibility issues. And this will basically do some virtualization of those specific directories. And basically, the converter will look at your app, see what it's doing, figure out which of these kind of shims it needs to insert, and then package that up with your application. And so they'll talk more about this tool in a session I'll mention. I think it's tomorrow. But basically, this is really going to be the story for taking an existing set of MSIs or install scripts and moving them forward to MSIX for large enterprise catalogs. The other cool thing about MSIX is often a developer produces the app or an app update, and then the IT pro produces a customization package which sets things like shortcuts, maybe sets up printers, maybe changes a couple logos or sets up some images. And if the developer then goes and creates an update for the app, the IT pro has to then go repackage those things together into an application, into like one MSI or one package. And the cool thing with MSIX is these things are layerable on top of each other. So the developer can basically create an app package or create an app update. The IT pro can create the MSIX for the customizations. And the first time those things will ever come together is on the user's machine when it's installed. And once they're installed, if an update from the developer is installed, all the customizations are still applicable. So it really lets you kind of get this church and state separation between the two roles of customization and app updates, between IT pros and developers. And we really think this is going to be a thing that will save a lot of time and headaches and fighting with the other people in your organization. Also, as Kevin mentioned, MSIX runs in a container on Windows 10. And so there'll be a lot more information about this in the MSIX section that I mentioned that happened yesterday in the afternoon. So that pre-record is already online. John and Nona go through all of the interesting gory details about MSIX. They gave you a demo on Windows 7. They talk about the containers and the kind of what there is today on Win 10 and the evolution of that and how we're going to move that forward to make it apply to more and more types of applications. And then to learn about how you take package or repackage, I should say, an existing application that's an MSI into an MSIX and how to do that en masse and learn more about that IT Pro tool I mentioned, go see Stefan and Dion's talk tomorrow afternoon in one ballroom over. And so they'll talk about the new tool. They'll talk about that packaging support framework, which does the kind of shim redirection for you. They'll talk about ways that you can integrate this with your existing workflow, be it SCCM or Intune, or something custom that you might have in your enterprise. So finally, we'll end by talking about the Microsoft Graph. OK, quick poll. Who, after the last 2 or 3 years, or even the last 2 keynotes in the last 2 days, think that they have a good understanding of what the Microsoft Graph is? Oren, you can't put your hand up. Yeah, it's a little bit of a confusing topic. I will try to do my best to explain my mental model of it. I think this is definitely one of those things that it helps to have a bunch of different perspectives to get kind of a real idea of all these things fit together. But my mental model is that the Microsoft Graph is all of the nouns that are attached to a signed-in user. So if you're signed in with an AAD, typically, or with an MSA, there's a bunch of things, especially if you have access to Office, there's a bunch of things that are attached to you as a user that are kind of nouns. And each of those nouns have verbs that you can go do things with them. So in the keynote today, you saw Yina basically used an application that was Excel as a calculation engine in the cloud. She basically went to the Excel noun and said, give me a cell. I'm going to read from a cell, and I'm going to write from a cell, and then get data from that cell. And so treating that thing as an application you could use to do work for you without having the application locally. You saw that Charles showed basically grabbing calendar data and then inserting that into an adaptive card, and then that got basically then sent to the user as part of an email message and displayed in Outlook. But again, that's grabbing the calendar as a noun and getting information about invitations or free and busy space as kind of the verb, effectively. And then basically throughout the keynote this morning, you saw lots of people use this concept of activities, which is kind of things that you've done, tasks that you've completed, or things that you're working on as basically a noun that you can use in a bunch of different contexts. So we'll talk specifically in this talk about activities as the actionable thing that you can do as an existing desktop developer and start interacting with. So to learn a little bit more about the graph and different devices and how you would use the Microsoft Graph on a phone, and specifically this is the technology that's powering the phone experiences that Shilpa showed you, you can go see Sean and Megan's session on Project Rome. So you'll get an understanding of the different things you can do, the SDKs you can use on your PC as well as iOS and Android, the different features that they have, and when those will be available in certain times. All the black stuff is available today. The pink things will be coming soon. So sets is this new concept, new-ish concept that Joe talked a lot more about this morning. It's arguably the biggest change to the Windows user experience that there's been since maybe Windows 95. I mean, you could talk about, maybe there's been some interim things that have been close to as impactful, but it's really a big change to how Windows or users can use Windows. It's basically a new visual tool to group things together You know, it's a new trick basically in the windowing toolbox of Windows. So on top of the new windowing metaphor, sets also gives Windows the task of remembering which apps, web pages, and things were associated together, and basically remembering that and then restoring that later. You know, sets will gather things together as if you have things together in a set or a docked window next to a set, and remember that those things are associated. And then via timeline, if you interact with one of those things, it'll bring them all back up together. And so, you know, again, as a developer, this is an opportunity for you to start thinking about re-engagement. You know, an opportunity to start thinking about re-engagement, and especially with the new tab page, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a second, will give you kind of options for re-engagement. The other thing that's interesting about sets in the activity feed is when you write to the activity feed, that's obviously stored in the cloud, right? That's the Microsoft Graph, if you will. And that is usable on other devices. So Shilpa showed you the timeline on iOS in the Edge browser. She showed the timeline on Android in the Microsoft Launcher. And you can use them there. You can also use them in your app using that Project Rome SDK I mentioned earlier. But basically, you now have the ability to access all the things that you've done as a user on any device. And you can use that as a developer to help your users complete tasks on different devices, have an experience that works you know, either in a mobile website or a mobile app. So as a developer, you know, I kind of mentioned sets and timeline give your app the ability to help your users figure out what they were doing and complete their tasks over time. And you know, this lets you basically rehydrate sessions over time. So you have the opportunity to write things to the graph, write state to the graph, and read it back. And so that was what Kevin showed you with that adaptive card. And we'll have a demo of that in a future session. So yeah, talked about that. Sorry, my notes are completely wonky right now on this machine. So this is actually, I found this slide to be really useful. So if you think about this set of things, these are all kind of example things that you or a user might do, right? You typically kind of have this root thing that's the green piece of content, and it has associated either websites or other apps associated with it. And really, sets is you know, putting these two things together, and then or three things together, and having Windows remember them and letting you basically restore them all at once from the timeline or from a different device. So again, you could restore this from the same computer, or you could go to a different computer, sign in, see your activity feed, click it, and basically launch those apps and all that content, assuming all that content's in the cloud. So from a developer perspective, what do you need to do? So you can participate in sets with any application as long as you're not customizing the title bar. So we've had to work with Office, obviously, a bunch to get them to work well in sets. But for most applications, UWPs don't have an option to do any customization. In most Win32 apps, certainly it was pretty difficult to do in WinForms. It's a little bit easier in WPF, but not that many apps have actually customized their title bar in WPF. You basically can start participating in sets. If you're UWP, you should definitely make sure that you take advantage of the new multi-instancing support that came, I think, late last year. And that, again, that's just a best practice for a desktop app. I mean, most users expect desktop apps to be multi-instancing and not the same instance. That's just kind of the behavior you expect. And so you should definitely move to take advantage of that model. We're talking with the Visual Studio team about making that the new default for UWP applications because that's kind of what people expect. And from a great experience, you should start writing activities to the activity feed and basically start controlling the window grouping and the tab visuals that are created. And so to get more information about all of these things and to actually start playing with them and see the code, go see Jason and Raymond's talk tomorrow. If you haven't seen Raymond Chen talk, he's awesome too, so it's a really good chance to see Raymond in action. So you learn about the ways that you can actually control how tabs appear for your app and how grouping happens, if it's grouped or not grouped by default as you create new windows. You'll learn about the APIs for activities and creating and interacting with the timeline, so that the ways that Windows will call you back when you're kind of rehydrated. You'll learn about some of the things you can control from the tab visuals. So you can change your tab color and change icons. And they'll also talk about the kind of future of the new tab page, because that is a place where the current flights do not have a lot of opportunity for developers to customize that, but we've already had a lot of feedback that we've given them about things that we think developers will want to do for the new tab page. And so Jason will talk about some of those directions as well as things that we're thinking about from the new tab page perspective. So the last topic we're going to cover here, because we're almost out of time, is adaptive cards. So adaptive cards, I like to think about this as kind of the lingua franca of the Microsoft graph. Every surface that we have that either shows notifications, that shows the timeline, that basically shows any sort of card or engagement UI, really talks this adaptive cards format. And really, the other thing that is coming, aside from all the things on the slide, is Outlook support. So that was shown in the keynote today. It will come out in the Outlook web app very soon, and then Outlook desktop app before too long. And so adaptive cards really are, it's basically just a slab of JSON that you're sending down to the client, which is then basically, it's crafted by a developer, sent down to the client. And it really spans the set of options between a kind of a fixed format. If you're familiar with how the live tiles work on Windows, that's kind of a fixed format model, versus basically saying I'm just going to host an iframe and jam an arbitrary piece of HTML, and that's kind of on the less secure or super flexible, less controlled side of the world. This is kind of a model in the middle where you're sending JSON that has content, it's stylable, but when it's hosted on a client platform, it has the opportunity to be branded by the hosting application. So basically, it's a lookless design that has UI attributes in it, and then it is rendered on the client, and the client has opportunities to change what it looks like. And the other thing that's cool about the first release of this, which just came out in March, is that there's renders for pretty much any type of UI framework that you might care about. So obviously, there's one in UWP. There's an HTML one, iOS and Android, and WPF as well. And I'll show you a demo here in just a second using the WPF render inside of WinForms in an element host, so you can see what that code would look like to start using this inside of your application. So again, these renders, this open source project, play with yourself. You can go interact with it. But these are the same tools that we've used to build those Android experiences that Shilpa showed you, that the web experiences that for Skype and Teams that are hosting adaptive cards are all powered by this here. So this is, you basically have kind of free reign and access to that code. You can go modify it to, if you need to. So let's go log in yet again to my machine. All right. So we're done with this one. So what we have here is a WinForms app. And again, all I've done is add a element host. So this is your standard WPF element host. And then I've added some JSON files. So these are card JSON files that I've stolen from the adaptivecards.io site that Matt Heidinger put up there. And so we'll just take a look at what these look like. So there's this really handy visualizer tool that Matt wrote that basically lets you see what this adaptive card is going to look like. So basically, the WPF render takes this set of JSON, which is just kind of a set of objects that describes what's going on over here. It's got a couple references to images effectively on the web, so you can point out to images if you'd like. And I screwed that up. So this is very live, so don't type. And then you can also host that inside of a WPF app. So in my code behind, I've basically added a load event. And so then I've referenced the NuGet package for adaptive cards. And then I create a render, one line of code. You set the schema version, which right now is 1. I basically have included this in my build output directory. So this file is there. I basically just use a standard .NET file reader, read it to end, and I use, this is the magic here, is basically adaptive card from JSON. So that static method, give it a slab of JSON, it gives you back a result which you can turn into a card. So then once you have the card, so this is the thing that is basically not yet styled for your application. It's styled for the system, but it's not actually yet rendered to a UI format. And so at this point, you need a renderer. And so this is where you get a WPF renderer. And you basically just hand it the card, and you get back basically a thing it's a WPF element, and you can just hook it up to your element host. So it's pretty straightforward code. If you take out the comments, it's about 5 or 6 lines of code. And then you can catch exceptions, but who does that in a demo? And when you run this, you'll basically see you've got a WinForms app, hosting WPF, and you've got your adaptive card there. Resizes, works just like you'd expect. We've got another example here, which is I'll show you the preview one. So this one is interesting because it has an action in it. So this is kind of think about it like a restaurant information card, but it has an action button in it. And so this actually needs to do something. And so in order to handle actions, so it's got this concept of actions down here, you need to basically handle that in your renderer side, in your application. So what I've got here is an action handler. And so basically I'm saying, if I see a URL action, which is what that sample has, I'm just going to basically open it, which in this case will launch it in the browser. And so you'll see here that I hooked up the action handler up here. So now, wait, damn it. I've got to change which JSON file I'm loading. So again, I just pulled these straight off the Adaptive Cards.io website for samples. And when I first did this, I was like, sweet, let me see if this action handler works. So I clicked it. I was like, it's doing something awesome. And then I realized Matt rickrolled me. And now I'm rickrolling all of you. But we're getting an ad first, because Google is monetizing rickrolling. Can you, like, the gall? We should go see that Black Panther movie. That looks pretty good. Anyways, there we go. There's Rick. Anyways, so yeah, I told Matt that he rickrolled me, and he was really happy. So yeah, be careful if you go to the AdaptiveCards.io site, because you will. Some of the content there is a little snarky. All right, we're still going. Never want to get deserted. OK, so to learn more about cards, to see some of the various tooling options, and see a bunch of these demos in action, go see Matt and David's talk. And then one topic I didn't get to talk about because I had way too much content and I ran out of time is notifications. So Marianne and Lee are going to talk about this new service we have, this Microsoft Graph Notifications, that lets you target a user across multiple devices and basically get read receipts effectively back from the Graph notification. So that's a handy service. They'll also talk about a new service we have for analytics on your notifications, so you can see how they're doing. If they're interactive, you can see how much time users spend with them and how they're engaged. And so that's a really handy tool for you. So combined with the graph notifications and the analytics, you can really start to get a sense of how you're doing as you're targeting users. And then finally, I realized after I saw this in the room for the first time, this is all the different sessions I mentioned, and it's a total eye chart. I'm so sorry. I thought this would be bigger. So you can see this later. I saw a lot of people taking pictures, but this is all the different sessions that you may want to check out in the next few days. Any questions, comments for Scott or I? I know it was about 20 minutes of questions before I started, so anything? Do not taunt Happy Fun Ball. SNL is probably going to sue me for even mentioning it. Yeah, I tried to find the video online, and they've done a really good job of making sure you can't find it anymore. Cool. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.